good morning, everyone. Welcome to our last Leadership Café in 2020, the last of a long series that started with the Optimist Café back in March with Claudia and Jerome on a weekly basis, and then later on a monthly basis. After summer, we started the Leadership Café series with 3 leadership cafes before this one on leadership and authenticity, leadership and compassion, and leadership and growth. And this leadership cafe today will be dedicated to leadership and change. And we have our special guest today, that is Simone Oremovic. And I'll hand over to Michi, who will do the interview and ask Simone a few questions. Please.
Simone, hi. Thanks a lot for being here and spending time with us.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, cool. So I'll do a couple of questions to get the conversation started, and then we can also hand over to the audience, to our other guests for further questions. So maybe let's start looking at your career a bit and how change kind of impacted that career. So maybe you could reflect and talk a bit about how change happened on a personal, professional level in your career, but maybe also in your organization's context. So if you can talk about like maybe periods or moments of significant change and how this affected you and what you took away from that.
Yeah, thanks a lot again for inviting me. I've seen quite a few familiar faces on the phone as well, and I'm really honored to be the one speaking, because I guess a lot of the others on the call would have at least as much to say as I do. So I'll try to keep it relatively short. I'm sure the audience has at least as much to contribute. And for all of those who know me a bit, I hope it will not be too repetitive, but feel free to jump in at any time and also comment. Maybe you can, even one of the things that I say, comment from the other perspective, how you have perceived, because you have seen me in those moments of changes. And I think it does something not only to ourselves, but it does something to the environment as well. So I'm happy to receive comments anytime. So when I start looking at moments of change and how this affects the career, I think there are 2 types of changes. The first one is the self-selected change. It's it's a moment that you choose to change, and it's something that you do on purpose for whatever reason, and we can talk about the different drivers for change. And then there's obviously the change that happens to you, where you're not in the driver's seat and where you have to deal with this. And for me, those are very different scenarios, and you prepare for them differently. And at the end of the day, they make you feel differently. I have chosen to come back to Austria after my education abroad, and that's for sure one of the biggest changing moments in life. It's where you choose to at least start your professional life, and in what kind of environment, and also what kind of culture, therefore, you start working. So that the change and the choice that you have to start your career, I think it's an important one. The other one is obviously the change that I made from going from an American company. I was with GE for 12 years, very, very big company, super international, American culture, very advanced in the field of HR, because I've worked more or less in HR all my life, to going to the Mobilcom Group at the time, which was much smaller, Austrian-based, different industry, different culture, therefore. And it was a very conscious choice, and therefore a big change in my working environment. For the reason to say GE was so great, and I loved it so much and was so passionate about this company, that I didn't want it to replicate and go to another type of similar company. I would not have joined Microsoft at the time, for example, or any other of the big American companies. This change had an impact, obviously, on my work and on the content of work, but also on my work style. So not only on the content, but also on the style, on how people work. Much less international, less in different time zones, less remote. In GE, even in the year 2003, 2004, we already worked virtually. I mean, things that we talk about today where people tell me, oh, it's fantastic, you can do home office. And I sit there and say, really? I've done this 20 years ago. My boss was in London, I was sitting in Vienna, or I was in Dublin and he was sitting in the US. So the type of work, the style of work has changed. And it was harder than expected, I have to admit. So the personal impact of the culture and of the people around me had a much bigger impact than expected. I would have thought if the content of HR is the content of HR, it's relatively easy. But the transition was tough, I have to admit. And it took me a while to get accustomed. And then after the mobile com and telecom experience, unconsciously changed back to a big American company, IBM, at the time, with the idea that it would replicate what I had in GE, and it was a disaster. I only stayed a year. I really literally hated IBM. It wasn't for me. It was a horrible culture, at least in my perspective. And again, this conscious choice and this change was much harder than expected. And again, it didn't turn out well, but I have not regretted it. And I think that's the important point, that the change that I have made in the end, even though it wasn't successful, I have always taken away something. I think that's the most important thing for me. When you change, you have done it. You cannot make the change unhappen. The change has happened anyway. So what you do with it is the important piece. And I've only stayed a year in IBM because I decided that I don't want to stay in a company that I'm not happy. And that this conscious choice, I think, is something you always have. And the learning out of it is also something you always have. And to evaluate what went wrong in this change is what was important for me. And since then, I had two more jobs, one at Baxter in the pharmaceutical company for 4 years that I really loved because I loved the industry and it was a fantastic company. And even though I liked it there a lot, I then got a good job offer I couldn't refuse. And I'm now at RHI Magnesita, which is an Austrian industrial company. And I'm in the executive board, in the management team. And I love, again, the international fact. So in essence, in my career, most of the changes I have done consciously and by choice, but not all of them have turned out to be successful. And mainly it was the working culture and the culture of the company that influenced if it's a success or not, and much less the technical content or really any challenges in terms of daily operations. And on a personal side, the biggest change, of course, was to have two kids relatively close to each other and still be working full-time. I've never gone for part-time because, again, it was a choice that it wouldn't work for me. I know myself, and I know if I work part-time, I get paid part-time, but I work full-time, and I didn't want this. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I mean, I maybe want to come back to the topic of organizational culture and different types of organizational culture and change a bit later, but a question more like also towards you and your leadership roles, because you are in leadership roles for quite some time now. What would you say, how have the expectations towards leaders and leadership changed in the past 10, 15 years, and how do you expect them to change in the midterm future?
Yeah.
Expectations from employees, from peers, from other stakeholders.
Yeah. I touched on it a bit in my comment when I said what we did in GE 20 years ago is what I experience on a broad scale now. So obviously you always have companies at a different moment in their maturity and also, again, in the different type of settings. But in general, yet leave alone those real pioneers that have been probably on a different leadership road for a very long time. It's something where we are now probably, again, due to the change of the pandemic situation, which was an change we didn't opt for, and it was a change that was brought to us on a very radical base, unexpected, quick, worldwide. We are at a turning point for leadership. And the turning point for leadership is the biggest one for me, based on 3 pillars. The one is leading virtually and remotely, which does make a difference for the particularly emotional and connectivity to people. The second one is the uncertainty and predictability has totally increased. So what we had in the past in terms of leading by goals, leading by objectives, leading with an operating rhythm, with predictable KPIs, this is all gone, or mainly gone. This creates a lot of uncertainty. And the third pillar for me is about how do people personally feel in their lives, and how stressed they are, and what is the emotional component of leadership that in the past, if you wanted, you could put aside to a certain moment, to a certain extent. Not that it's clever to do this as a leader, but a lot of leaders were still dividing between the personal situation of an employee and the employment. Now it's simply not feasible anymore. So the communication aspect as a team in terms of virtual leading, the unpredictable and volatility, and the emotional component are for sure the new challenges in leadership, and something that we need to address really on a worldwide base.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this actually leads very nicely to the next question, which is about leadership development, which is, of course, for HR a big topic. And when Alexandra, Peter, and me, when we started talking about like the Leadership Café, one of our initial questions was, do we actually put too much emphasis and thinking, time, money on this whole leadership topic? Because I mean, it's a topic which is around for like, I mean, decades, ages, yeah. And we throw a lot of money towards it. People spend a lot of time in trainings, in educations. Now we even have a leadership cafe. There's tons of books and I mean, whatnot, yeah. So what do you think with like the 3 pillars you mentioned and these like 3 main changes, what does this mean for leadership development? What is your take on that?
I always said if I would have very little money left as an HR function in my job, I would probably work only on one topic, and it's leadership, leadership, leadership. There is nothing else that is important. At the end of the day, if you have good leaders, all the rest will follow. If you have good leaders, they are capable of selecting their own employees. So recruiting is, for example, in much better hands. And at the end of the day, that's building the employee base. If you have good leaders, the internal communication department becomes much less important because they do a good job in communicating. If you have good leaders, the strategy gets executed better. So you have obviously better performance. So there cannot be enough emphasis on leadership. That's the only thing that will make or break a company's success. However, what I think needs to be rethought is how we do leadership development. So, and here, obviously, we need to move on from those long-term training curriculums where we put people on a lead. We select them as a talent, and then we select them as a future leader, and then we select them at whatever senior leaders, and then they are in a program, and it's static, and it goes on for a year, and that's just old-fashioned. So the formats and the type of delivery, that therefore also the time invested and therefore also the money invested in reality is something that clearly as an HR function we need to rethink what we offer to the company. And ideally, obviously leadership starts at the top. Ideally, if you invest in some very, very good few leaders at the top and you have the top leaders really, then they can cascade it down and they can actually, in their role as leader, educate their leader, because that's exactly what leadership is about. Leadership is not about an HR function giving you all the answers and a toolbox and a tick the box. So we have opted for a slightly different approach. Therefore, I cannot tell you how successful it will be, to be honest, because we have just also started in the crisis to adapt our model, but we have opted for a very personal, individual approach to what leaders really need, and have said at the end of the day, it's nothing else than doing different types of assessment. So you as a leader are self-responsible to assess your capability with a 360-degree feedback, with some other methods that we offer. So we have some assessment tools people can choose, with a good feedback discussion of your leader, where we as HR help on how to give good feedback. So that's one of the things you need to have. And then people have a profile and say, this is my current leadership style. This is my current leadership skills. These are my capabilities. And then they select where they want to become better. Because maybe some leaders say, you know what? In this concrete skills and capabilities, I don't even want to change. That's fine for me. That's who I am. I don't want to become an average leader, but that's who I am. Then fair enough, then let's leave it. And then they select the leadership capabilities and skills they want to move the needle. And we tell them what development tools are good for this. Do you need more coaching? Do you need more classic mentoring? Do you need more business acumen? Do you need how to give feedback? Or do you need change management? Or do you need whatever, strategic capabilities?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a toolbox to select.
Okay.
And people go there or they don't. It's their self-responsibility.
Yeah. So if I understand that correctly or interpret it correctly, so it's very much on an individual basis. What I found very interesting in our last Leadership Café conversation with one of the managing directors of Caritas, I think, but please correct me, those people who were present, if I'm wrong, it was also very much about shared leadership, like leadership as a collective role and responsibility. So do you also develop your leaders as a team, as a peer group?
We have something that is called high-performing teams, but to be very honest, if you have great individual leaders, one of a core capability of a great leader is, of course, collaboration. So our industry that I'm working in now is probably not the most advanced organization, to be very transparent. It's in very old-fashioned, traditional industry with a lot of engineers and technical people. So what I need first is to bring them as individuals to the level where I see the leadership of tomorrow should be. Now, what we do, however, is that the assessment of each individual leaders is based on our common culture and leadership capabilities. So the framework that we give them on what is our expectation, what do we want, is a tailor-made RHI Magnesita framework. So we have put a lot of effort in building our own culture, our own values, our behaviors, and our leadership capabilities. And when they do the assessment, they are benchmarked against this. So at least they all have the same goal. They all have the same understanding of what leadership is. And as I said, then sometimes for teams, if they want it, we do something called high-performing teams or classic team sessions. But it's not the core focus at the moment on the leadership development.
Mm-hmm. Can you maybe talk a bit more about this second pillar you mentioned, like this uncertainty and that this kind of like traditional leadership toolbox being maybe not obsolete, but kind of like going in this direction? Could you maybe expand a bit on that?
Yeah, I think what we have to understand is that we have put a lot of effort in managing by objectives. This was the tool of the 90s, and managing by objectives, a lot of things were linked to this. You got your goals, and based on the goals, you got the feedback, and based on the feedback, you got a performance rating, and based on this, you got a bonus. So even your money was tied to this. Now, if you want to get, or if you understand that this managing by objectives doesn't work anymore, because again, it's too quick, it's changing too quickly, it's too volatile, then you have to ensure that you decouple all the other processes that you have tied to this as well, so that people are not getting afraid and say, oh, you're taking away my goals, because you say you can't give them to anymore. But what does this mean for my feedback cycle? What does this mean for my bonus? What does this mean for getting a performance differentiation? So we have started to do this really holistically in the organization. And we have looked at all those elements together and have said, what is it that we can give to our leaders, again, coming from the top as a guideline, so that they can lead differently? And we have clearly worked, for example, with the strategy, and have set the strategy, out of the strategy, that everybody, really everybody, even the blue collar worker on the shift, needs to understand, because that's giving our vision and that's giving our direction. Every quarter we sit down and we translate the strategy into the regional leads, and from the regional leads into the operational needs. So we make efforts to cascade this down. So there's a lot of communication effort on how to give clarity. So the clarity is given not on an individual objective level and not on a goal level, but on a strategic and company level. And for example, our bonus scheme is also attached to this. So there's only one bonus scheme for the whole company. You don't fill out any individual sheets. You don't assess. If we are successful, you all get something.
Okay.
If you're not successful, then we don't deserve the extra money. Then you have your salary. The salary is for your job. So we try to manage differently.
Okay. There is already a couple of questions in the chat, but I will maybe kind of like close my part with one question, which you in a way touched upon already earlier. So looking back at these different career steps in different organizational cultures, could you maybe talk a bit about how those different types of organizations were dealing with change in different ways? So like from a company like GE to like a global company to like a local regional player like Telekom Austria, and now to an Austrian global company, or like a company coming from Austria but with a global footprint.
I think it's interesting. And if you would have asked me to make an assessment on those companies without having worked there, so you put 5 cards, for example, on the table called GE, Mobilcom, IBM, Baxter, RHI Magnesita, and you would ask me to describe the company culture and therefore also their ability and approach to change, I would have gotten it wrong, to be honest. I would have probably said GE and IBM are super transparent and open and dynamic and towards innovation and this typical engaging American culture, and therefore open to change and open to feedback and open to engagement, while Baxter is somewhere in the middle, and probably the Mobilcom Telecom more towards the traditional, together with RHI Magnesita. And in reality, that's not correct. And I've started to reflect a bit on it, on why. And I think I've come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, it is not so much the industry sector. It's also not so much on where this company is headquartered. There is a certain element to this. It's also not so much the size of the company, interesting enough, but it's the top management. It's what kind of appetite does the CEO and the executive team and also the board allowing for this company to do. So how much of an innovation drive, of a risk appetite, of a change approach does this company allow to happen? Because if you have a super protective, super conservative board that never goes out and tries new things, there is no change dynamic. Well, it's really starting at the top, and the culture, and this is clearly something I have, for example, seen in GE, even such a big, huge company, which the change of culture takes a long time. When Jack Welch left and Jeff Immelt came, it wasn't immediate. But after 2 years, the company felt differently. also in terms of culture and also in terms of, therefore, change and risk and dynamics.
Yeah, I like the expression appetite for change. That's a very nice one. Maybe let's turn to the questions in the chat. I see we have like 3 or 4, like from Petra, one from Patrick, one from Luisa. Since Petra was first, Petra, maybe you want to ask your question? Petra Grell, not Petra Stangl.
Sure, thanks, Michael. Simone, I have to say, I love your ideas. So I realize that we have similar ways of thinking on leadership. And I have several questions, but I start with the first one. On your personal journey. You said you had several times a cultural misfit in your career. And I was wondering, how did you then change, or did you change your due diligence process on this cultural fit? So how did you define for you, what is it, what you need, and where you can perform as you want to perform? And how were you able to find out, as soon as you knew what you want, whether that company fits to your values and to your cultural values, let's say?
Yeah. I think it's you only find out what you want when you are suddenly in a situation where you don't have it anymore. And because I started in GE, I took this for granted. And this was my first job, and I was very young, and I stayed there for 12 years. And again, then I went to Mobilcom, and it was actually fine. It was different, but it was fine. And only when I came to IBM, I realized that, oh my God, there are companies that doesn't have these cultural values. And what didn't work out for me in IBM was that they were totally leading by control and leading almost by fear, and the individual person didn't count. It was just the process and the performance. And while I'm a very process-driven person for the sake of efficiency, because I think it helps people, I would always obviously put the people in first. And when you realize this, it's really a kind of one of those aha moments where I say, oh, there are things that doesn't fit to me. And then you have to go through your own personal change curve, and you have to let this happen, to first be astonished, and then be disappointed, and then come to the point where you say, I don't accept this, because I will never accept that I am unhappy because of a job. I will never. I only have one life, and my life comes first. And as much as I love to work, it's only a job. And if I don't like the job, I change it. And I will not change IBM. So I have the one to go, be the one to go out. And then I made, it was a very, once you are at this point, it's so obvious that it took me a month to realize that the only thing I want is go back to a company where the person comes before anything else. And when I interviewed for Baxter, I actually asked a lot of questions exactly on this, and I was very transparent with them. And I said, I'm not worried about the HR content. I know I can do this. I'm not worried about the product. I can learn about pharmaceutical products. I'm not worried about being suddenly in a manufacturing company where I've never been before, but I am worried about your company culture. And they were super transparent, and it really fitted well.
Okay. The next question I saw is from Patrick.
Hi, Simi.
Hi.
Maybe Simi was one of my first bosses in GE, so I know her quite well.
So you can comment if I all these things I say in theory about leadership.
I don't comment it now.
That's fine.
No, and I even think, Simi, it was one of your first leadership roles.
Yes.
28 or something, when you took. So I think quite an experience and interesting time. Now I would like to come back maybe more or less to 2 questions. First of all, you mentioned in terms of leadership development, and we probably all of us experienced a situation where you have a very good technical professional in a leadership position, but who is a bad leader and who will most likely never learn leadership. So how do you deal in that one, knowing you need this technical know-how and you probably have not a chance to change it? So how do you deal, especially, and that's probably also valid in RHI Magnesita, that you have these kind of types? And the second question is more a generic one. We are currently experiencing the remote office working a lot, and this is probably, it come to stay, already came to stay. And it's making something with the company culture. So how do you think on how will we build up loyalty in the future? How will we build up a team culture where people are not really physically together? So this is the question I was just like to discuss here in the round. It's probably interesting.
Yeah, and again, I'm happy if other jumps in. On your first one, I think it's a classic one where there is nothing you can really do other than being transparent. And I think there you have to give feedback to the person if you feel he or she is a good expert but not a good leader, and most likely there is a transition phase. So I'm not a fan of taking people out of their leadership role immediately and or even getting them out the door, but I am a fan of being transparent to the leader and saying, look, for this and these reasons, we don't think you're doing a great job in the leadership. Do you even want this leadership role? And some people are actually quite relieved when they say, you know what, if I would have a choice, I would rather prefer to be an expert than a leader. So I think you have three options. Either the person is happy to go back to an expert role and you honor a great expert career. So you don't cut the salary, you don't make them feel worth less, but you just let them be experts rather than leaders, and then everybody is happy. And you put another leader in place and you leave the expert as an expert. Or the person is for the first time hearing honest feedback, because honestly, the feedback culture in most of companies aren't great. We can say whatever we want, but the amount of people or leaders who can really give precise and honest feedback is limited. And this person might have never heard that he's not doing a good job as a leader, and you can then really work on a concrete development plan. Or the third option, unfortunately, is it doesn't work out because the person doesn't want to be an expert or doesn't want to listen to feedback. Then eventually you will have to change it, because it's unfair to the team to leave a bad leader in. So at the end of the day, bottom line, you need to fix the leadership issue. Letting an expert who is not good in a leadership role stay is not an approach. And to come to your second question again, here I'm happy to hear also other ideas, because I don't have the perfect idea on what does he do when we all work remotely. We have tried a lot of things. Some of them work really well, but I think as all other companies, we're doing a lot of course, team events via video. We try to always have a moment of recognition in our calls. We try to even do celebration moments. Yesterday, I heard a nice thing, for example, on a virtual call. They did Christmas song guessing via emojis. So, for example, driving home for Christmas was a car, a home, and a Christmas tree. And then everybody voted what Christmas song this is. So come up with some fun elements, come up with some ideas on what to do for people other than just work. Make sure you really plan for enough time, particularly with calls and meetings. People tend to have them even more back to back, because in the office you have this quick coffee time, what you don't have anymore virtually. So plan in coffee breaks, book 20 minutes with someone, call it coffee break. Don't let only the content work take over. I think you have to create those moments artificially.
Any other thoughts and ideas on Patrick's second question? We can come back to that later as well.
Yeah, well, I think we are currently all in the phase of trial and error. Yeah, because nobody knows what's the long-term outcome of this topic. Yeah. I see the tendency, at least in my company, that the people tend to work much more than they did before. So that's also something which is probably in the long term affecting the work-life balance topic. So I think we really, as an HR, should have a good focus on that one, so that we not over accelerate what the people are doing currently. Yeah. So
yeah, agree.
my experience.
Yeah. Luisa, you had it's more like a comment or a statement than a question. Do you want to say something about that?
Well, I experienced that leaders are in a massive transition in every aspect. So you don't only have the different work levels, like if you have virtual work and the homework, or then the home office work, or the office work when you're in the office, or even in a coffee on the way. So I think eventually we will be traveling again on business terms, and we will hopefully meet in person, because if at the moment it's just a period where it's due to the worldwide crisis, it won't come back to where it was. It will be a new normal, and we will, as leaders, we will be the ones to be the architects on this way. But the real question I would like to ask you would be, if you're a leader and you're about to onboard a new role, how can you figure out that the other leaders in your board will meet your culture, your values, your approach of leadership? I think that's the most critical part in deciding where to engage as a leader eventually in this career plans. And you mention it also in your different changes.
Simone,
Simone, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Okay, sorry. I think it becomes probably more and more important as you move on in your career, probably for two reasons. The first one is because when you start your career, you're not immediately a leader. You're more focused on the technical things or on the content of your work, but also to be very transparent, because you are probably more open. You are less having your own ideas of how things should look like, and you're still learning and discovering, and you're less of a fixed personality. So that's to a certain extent somewhat sad that when now, after 25 years of being in professional life and most of my life being a leader, that I have my more or less fixed view on how leadership should be. And that's something that I'll try to challenge also myself sometimes, that, have I become too narrow-minded? Am I the one who sometimes needs to adapt again? Exactly what we said. I mean, I need to change along as well. My style of leadership from 20 years ago doesn't work nowadays either anymore. So I think let's not forget that we as leaders also have to move along, and there I try to find the balance. So I try to find a company and my own leader that meets what I would call them values. So there are certain things I would never compromise on. Certain company values, certain leadership capabilities in my direct boss, that they are a must-have criteria. And then those I simply transparently ask. I'll try to find out. I ask in an interview. I ask for references. When I interviewed for the RHI Magnesita role, I have asked to talk to my peers. So even though the CEO already said, you have the job, I know you're the right one, I love to have you. I said, that's great to hear, but can I talk to 3 of my peers from the executive team before I join? So I'll try to find out those. And the rest, I try to be open-minded and say, you know what, that's also a possibility to shape this leadership journey together, and which is probably particularly easy when you are in HR, and in all fairness. So I can, of course, drive the leadership content more than maybe some of my other colleagues.
We already have a few more questions coming from the chat, and then one actually kind of like speaks nicely to what you just said. Comes from Mars Lozano. Do you want to ask your question yourself?
Hi, it's great what you said, Simi. I share the vision with you because I also worked for GE Power back then, and it's so true what you say, that they really empower the employees. But afterwards I worked for like a family company, and then for another international company, again. And yeah, the culture was very, very different. And now I just read this book, which is called No Rules Rules, which is about Netflix and how they they became not even like a great company, but they just took away one of their blockbusters, Blockbuster, right? So one of the main things of the book is like they appreciate candor. And I think if you say that to the companies today, they will be just like you said, yeah, feedback, it's okay. Or like Patrick said, yes, we like feedback, but leaders will be like, yeah, they will not take it. And or they will take it aggressively. So what has been your experience about how can leaders accept that feedback that they have, that they need to make changes, to accept those changes in a positive way without feeling threatened, like, oh my God, it means that I'm not the expert, or it means that I'm a bad leader. How could you deal with that?
Again, I think it's all in the dialogue. I mean, I can give you a very recent example from yesterday. Yesterday, we were at the executive team with our top 10 senior leaders, because we're just having an issue and there's a problem. And then suddenly the finger pointing started. And the sales director from Americas said to the supply chain directors of Americas, but you got us the wrong material, because obviously you're not customer focused, because you in purchasing are never out with the customer. And then the purchasing director start to get completely defensive and said, how can you say I'm not customer focused? I mentioned the customer in every single of my conversation. And then we said, guys, stop it immediately. It's not about blaming here. It's not about finger pointing. It is about getting the issue fixed. And the CEO himself said, you're both doing a great job. You both have different angles. Please, let's not get into an emotional discussion. If there is some feedback you want to give to each other, do this. So I think you have to set the tone from the top and have to say, what kind of feedback culture do you want? And feedback, as soon as it starts to be blaming or accusing or aggressive, you need to stop it. And you need to make sure that you understand that it's about making the company successful. At the end of the day, we're not here to be best friends. We're here to make the company successful by understanding each other's working mechanism, types, and roles. So don't take it so personal.
Thanks.
Sami, I come back to you, but let's first maybe come to Alexis, because his question also goes in this direction, and then to Anna, and then Sami, you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Simona, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, and experience. I really like what I hear coming out from you. My question is very, very simple, and I normally summarize everything we have been discussing here for John Maxwell, that is says organization rises and falls because of his leadership. We have this upward feedback. Okay, and sometimes it's done through 360 degrees and so on and so forth. Sometimes organizations send questionnaires, anonymous questionnaire asking people to provide feedback. And as an information technology professional, know sometimes that those anonymous feedback, you can't get where it's coming from. In this upward feedback, 360 feedback, sometimes it's used as a management uses as a punishing those who provide a no well-placed feedback. How your organizations are shielding this this exercise of 360 degree or our feedback to protect the let's say the subordinate in this way when they share the perception of how they're being, how situations goes in the company.
I think here, that's really one of the key roles of my HR functions, I have to say. So while we don't feel that we are the ones who should lead instead of the leaders, as I said before, we are not the ones who do the tick the box exercises, but we enable leaders to lead. I think one of the roles that we have as true HR business partners, where we work very closely with the organization and we part of their teams, is that we stay the neutral facilitator, and that we look, and whenever we do feedback rounds like 360-degree feedback, we are the ones pre-discussing with the leaders. We are the ones making sure that it's done in a transparent but still I would say respectful way, and obviously that it isn't misused. So I think that's one of the key roles of HR, and that's why it's so important that we stay closely connected, and that we really know the people, that we can be the one always advocating in the middle and making sure that we counterbalance, because obviously there can be leaders who are simply not good leaders and who misuse this. Mm. So that's really one of the key roles of HR.
Anna, you had a statement. Do you want to phrase it into a question, or do you maybe want to make your statement? But you have to unmute yourself for doing so. Anna? Anna, you seem very eloquent, but we don't hear you.
Thanks, Nick. And someone was like, are you crazy? No, it's Mike. Okay, thank you.
Are you crazy?
So in large companies, what often happens, or what I've often seen happen, is that for employees to progress to a different position or to change somewhere, if they do not have the very classical profile and the very classical kind of career path, it is very hard to transition to a new area. So there's two ways of doing that. One is to get a position that they don't like, that don't really fit, but just like to get the trust, they could maybe do something else, stick it out for 2 or 3 years to then get towards where they would like to go, which I have seen quite a couple of people in these situations, and it was not a good fit for them or the company. Or the other way would be to leave the company entirely to do something somewhere else, to then be hired back in the ideal scenario, or stay somewhere else. Have you managed to identify a way of keeping these employees and giving them these maybe off the chances off the beaten track, or
Yes.
is this desirable in the first place?
Yes, and I didn't go into the details because the time doesn't allow, but as you're bringing this question, I can give you my personal example. I actually didn't stay with GE 12 years in a row, but I was with GE for 6 years, and then I left GE for a year because at the time I wanted to move back to Austria, and there wasn't any role in GE Austria available. And I made the deal with my boss at the time that I move out of GE in order to have my personal life as a priority, but I always stayed in touch. And as soon as the position in Austria as the HR director became available, he hired me back in. So I have made exactly this myself, because I truly believe you're right. Staying in a situation where you are not happy is never the right choice. So I would always opt for letting people go, let them see something else, develop, but simply stay in touch. We have an alumni network where we keep in touch with the people that we really like. Our CEO is personally involved. We make this kind of our external talent pool. Some of them might come back a day, and even those who do not come back, they are kind of the friends of the house, and we still use them from time to time for expertise or for guest speaking. They made great careers somewhere else, so it's always good to have this network, and it's always better to let someone go at the right time as a friend than frustrating them and having them go 2 or 3 years later anyway.
We have about 10 minutes left. So Sami, you had a question, and then there's 2 more questions from Petra and from Luisa. So maybe we can fit them all in if you keep yourself short.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thanks for the talk, Simi. What you said sounded a bit contradictory to me, like we are not here to be friends and there is no transparency actually, because I cannot express myself when I'm angry. So yeah, I'm not saying like we have to go for the conflict or there should be a way to resolve it, but when you repress them, what happens next? Like we are here for the process. We are here for the success of the business. No, I'm not always here for the success of the business because it's not my business. I might go to another company. So these are a bit contradictory to me.
Okay, but I always see every job I do as if it would be my business. So that's just my approach. But I agree. There's probably a way to look at it differently. But for me, it's really, I run this company and this job as if it would be my money, my business, my success. And therefore, that's what I have in mind. Of course, I love the people I work with. I go for a coffee with them. I even go for dinner with them. But it's not my primary goal. My primary goal is to be honest, transparent, and develop the people. It's not to be their best friend. That's what I meant.
Not the best friend, but we are spending like most of our lives with them.
You have to love the people you work with. You know.
Yes, then I can also be able to fight with them. If not, it doesn't work. I mean, we are emotional beings.
Oh yeah, ask people around me. Very emotional. I still slam the doors.
I can confirm.
Has changed. Just that we are in an open office and I don't have a lot of doors anymore. But
but maybe it's not friendship. Maybe it's respect. You have to value the people and not like them as persons, especially. But you have to respect them as people.
Absolutely.
Because you cannot like everyone, and I don't think you have to like everyone you work with, but you have to respect them.
Yeah.
Time for 2 more questions. Petra and then Luisa, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, cool. So I really like the way you phrase it, that the leadership, the top leadership, it has to come from them. But I see companies, especially in Austria, where the top leadership is not yet there, is this culture. So if you would like to change it, did you also take the way and remove somebody from the top leadership if this doesn't fit in? And if yes, who decides on that?
Yes.
To change?
When I joined 3 years ago, my CEO and myself, we did an assessment of the executive team after 6 months. And I very clearly, and at the time we were 9 in the executive team. And I very clearly told him that A, we have a structural problem. We are too big, and B, we also have a cultural problem. And since I'm here, we actually changed the CFO. We are only 7 instead of 9, and of those 7, we changed 3. So actually, we really made the conscious decision, and the only reason we changed them is exactly for leadership and culture. None of them were doing a bad job, but we were just not fitted for the future we want to have this company in.
And do you have, sorry for an add-up question, do you have any recommendation if the CEO is the problem?
Then you have a problem.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say. Then you need to see how quickly you can access the board, but that's very tricky. Yeah.
Thanks for the honesty.
Luisa, maybe the last question for today, or maybe, yeah, let's see.
I experience that this former HR as a topic has become a very important tool in the success of our company for the future, as you just mentioned before. I mean, having such a close collaboration with the CEO to developing the board to where the future of the company goes. This word like people and organization becomes a completely different meaning in a worldwide acting leadership role. Is that what you experience too, on a worldwide scale, not only with your
I think we're moving there slowly. I don't think we are where it should be, but there are more and more companies which moving in this direction, which I think it's a trend to move away from the administrative old-fashioned HR function. In a lot of companies, it's now called people and culture. In a lot of functions, it's called people enablement or human capital, whatever. So I think we're moving into this direction, but we're not there on a global scale, to be honest. So I'm quite lucky.
Mm-hmm. There was a suggestion from Marlena regarding remote work. Any more questions for Simone? Hmm? I mean, we did cover quite a lot of ground. No? Okay. It was a very engaged discussion. I mean, from my point of view, I mean, what I find interesting and worth thinking about is maybe there is a move away from this idea of like this individualistic, heroic leadership, like this individualistic figure, more towards, I mean, for some companies, depends really on the culture and on the organizational context, towards a more like shared leadership. But I think Simone also emphasized the role of leadership development. And I think, I mean, every organization needs to figure that out for themselves. I mean, there is no silver bullet, like one solution which fits to every organization. But I think what I take away also from today is that what you said about these like 3 pillars of how the leadership roles are changing and how the situation for leadership is changing, with regards to remote work, with regards to uncertainty, and with regards to the traditional leadership toolbox not really working anymore. I think that's my takeaway from today. Sandra, Peter, Claudia, any closing comments from you?
Thank you, Michi, for your questions, and thanks to everyone for your questions. I love the discussion. Thanks, obviously, Simone, for being here and sharing your wisdom with us in our last session this year. I think you said many things that are food for thought for every one of us. And if there are no more questions, I think we'll...
And if you have questions, a lot of people on the call have my numbers, Alexandra, of course. So anytime, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to have a separate discussion. So there's no worries.
But don't mail her on LinkedIn, because I don't think she's there very often.
No, LinkedIn is I'm a traditional leadership person. I love to talk to people.
Yeah, excellent. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great holiday season, even though this year it might be different than the previous years. Spend the time with your loved ones, and we will keep you posted on our plans for next year.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Simi. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.